Joining us now via Zoom chat is Dr. Joe Pojman, founder and executive director of the Texas Alliance for Life. Good morning to you, Dr. Joe.
Morning, gentlemen. Man, it's an honor to be with you on Catholic Drive Time.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you. We are grateful for your time today. There's some stories in the news today, and I would like to get your input on this. One I saw out of Ireland over the weekend. And Ireland, I'm Catholic. Ireland's supposed to be Catholic. We're supposed to be all on the same page here. And it's really depressing to see this story. This hospital in Ireland has basically said that 95% of their parents who have Down syndrome babies have opted to abort their children. They don't even have to pressure them all that much. They just choose to abort their children. This seems like a really disturbing story. What say you, Dr. Joe Pojman?
It is very disturbing because that was a nation that we always thought as a very Catholic nation. It used to have a protective measure in its constitution that banned abortions, protected unborn babies from abortion. That got removed a few years ago by a popular vote. It was overwhelming. I guess we can maybe call Ireland a post-Catholic nation, unfortunately. It's a shame that people look at Down syndrome as something which must be eliminated by abortion. That's such a terrible tragedy. And, in our country, I think that more and more, not enough, but more and more, Down syndrome is looked at something which has just, people can accomplish amazing things. I'm based in Austin, Texas. As you know, we have a marathon every year and through the streets of Austin. And one of the people who ran that successfully was a young woman with Down syndrome.
Oh, wow.
I just saw a story of a woman who graduated with a bachelor's degree from college. I don't know, I remember where that was, someplace in the country. It's a shame that Ireland is on that same path that we have for so long, in which Down syndrome is thought to be treated by aborting the child. So yeah, it's a terrible tragedy. It's a waste of innocent human life, and it's totally contrary to what we should be as a nation which protects our most vulnerable, including people with disabilities.
We've had so much progress recently in the pro-life cause. Of course, the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision, Supreme Court, that's huge. I mean, how many thousands of lives have been saved through that? And yet a story like this, I think, demonstrates we have so much work still to do. A society that thinks that a life doesn't count if it has Down syndrome and most of them have to be eliminated is a society that's in desperate need of evangelization.
It really is. We talk about building a culture of life, but that culture of life has to be built in people's hearts. And that means there's two things wrong. One, that a person with disabilities ought to be eliminated. That's a terrible thing. The worst example of that is the nation of Iceland, which declared that it had become totally free of Down syndrome because they had a 100% abortion rate of people with Down syndrome. That's just that's horrendous. And the second thing is a failure to realize that the baby after birth is the same as the baby before birth. The unborn child is a baby. And fortunately, in this country, we could not imagine deliberately taking the life of a person with Down syndrome, not legally. I mean, that clearly is against the law. But why do we not also see that it should be against the law to take the life of anyone, including a person with disabilities, before birth? Because it's the same baby.
Mm. I think we saw a majority of Americans, in spite of their political leanings, really was in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade and pushing that back to the states. I mean, it seems like the majority of Americans are pro-life and are up for some restrictions on abortion. And yet it also seems that a majority of Americans still think that Down syndrome babies are a nuisance or a burden on their lives.
It is American public is kind of mixed, and we have maybe, if you think of it, a big portion of us think that the pie chart that we had in school, maybe a third of us or more are pro-life. We really do want to protect unborn babies, and want the law to reflect that. There's a third who are just pro-abortion. And they not only believe abortion should be legal, it should be legal up to the moment of birth. for any reason, just simply because that's what the parents or the mother wants. And even if the child, we're seeing this in some of the states that are allowing babies to be born alive after abortion, surviving an abortion, and it's legal to take no measures to save that baby's life, to give certain basic measures to protect that baby's life and allow that to continue. And we know that does happen. We have there's an organization called Survivors, which has more than 400 members. These are people who have survived an abortion. They have the medical documentation to prove it. They have survived abortions, and they've gone on to live successful lives. But so the problem now is that we really have to think about it. What I love about your show is you're reaching the third that are pro-life, but you're also reaching a lot of middle ground people. That middle third, they don't know how to think, and it depends how we portray ourselves. So if we be who we are as a pro-life movement, we love people, we are peaceful, we support only legal activities, and we want to reach people through our education efforts. And we want to provide compassionate alternatives to abortion so that no woman thinks she has to seek an abortion because she has no way out. That is the pro-life movement. And if we represent who we are to that middle ground people, then we win.
Any surprises this year, especially in light of the overturning of Roe v. Wade? Kansas, I think, was surprising to me. Voting to keep abortion. If you just said, all right, Joe, name 5 states that will keep abortion, Kansas would not have been on that list. And yet they were.
Yeah, Joe, you're so right. Kansas was a huge disappointment and a surprise. They had that popular referendum last summer. It was shortly after Roe versus Wade. And it had, I think you've had some people on here talking about it in the weeks that followed. It was very disappointing. The language was a little squirrely. It was a little difficult to understand. I would not have written that language on that ballot initiative the way it was, but I think the reality is it lost, and it lost badly. That was a big surprise and a big, big disappointment. So what does that mean? That means that when we have to be very careful when we take this to the public, and when we're trying to reach that middle ground, we better be very careful how we phrase the language and how we educate people about it. Otherwise, it's quite possible we can lose. Yeah. And that was, unfortunately, a pretty classic example of a terrible loss.
So let me ask you about Texas. There is a huge effort to flip Texas blue. I think people would love to see Texas go more progressive in the next presidential election for sure. But I know there's a ton of pressure on our major cities in the great state of Texas. Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. Austin is a pretty much lost cause. I'm not sure why you still live there. But nonetheless, there is a huge effort to force Texas to embrace the pro-abortion cause. What do you think its future looks like? I mean, is it possible? Abbott just got reelected, so I guess there's more time. But nonetheless, what is the future in your opinion, Dr. Joe?
The future is a threat, and we have to be vigilant. And I'm happy to talk about Texas because I think it's an example for quite a number of states. And I know you have a very national audience, and you're all over the country. So in Texas, we think of Texas as a very conservative state. It's very mixed. And as you say, the urban areas, just like all over the country, are very liberal. They have gone from mixed to purple to blue to very blue. And that blue is going into the suburbs. Now, that's Democrat versus Republican. But what's frightening is the Democratic Party in Texas, like all over the nation, have embraced a solidly pro-abortion agenda. So when I see blue, I see advocates of abortion. So we have, as you pointed out, Joe, Greg Abbott was up for re-election. He's running for a governor. He ran for re-election for the second time, and he won handily, 11-point margin. He ran against Robert Francis, we know him as Beto O'Rourke. Beto was well-funded, record amount of money he raised. He raised well more than $70 million, much as that was from out of state. So a couple of lessons here. The pro-lifers can win. The conservatives can win. But it takes a lot of money. Abbott had more than that, perhaps more than $100 million he raised. Wow. All that money used for political ads and so forth, just astounding. But also we had to have a really solid candidate. We heard a lot about the quality of candidates. Abbott is a quality candidate. He's solid. He's articulate. He knows who he is. He knows what he stands for, and people know that. And he's right on all the right issues. The Beto O'Rourke, but the other lesson is he will be funded enormously from out of the state. And that can happen anywhere. There's so much money out there, political money. It can come from inside your state or outside of your state. So the pro-lifers did turn out. That was huge. He was pro-life, 100% pro-life, did not back down, completely wanted to protect unborn babies from abortion, had no exceptions. He wanted to protect babies who were conceived in rape or incest. He did not blink in front of those accusations that he was incompassionate. He was very compassionate for the mother and the baby, the child who had been raped. So we have to. I think that's a really good lesson. But long term, Joe, we have to be vigilant. We have our movement has to grow. It has to continue to educate that middle ground people. Otherwise, our gains are going to just evaporate. And that is a very real danger. And frankly, I spend a lot of time thinking about that. Sometimes it keeps me up at night.
I bet it does. I mean, that's the focus of Texas Alliance for Life, right? Is to work on policy here in the great state of Texas. So one last question on that: the state legislature, where are they at on the spectrum of abortion versus pro-life?
Well, the elections were successful not only for the governor, but also for our Texas House and our Texas Senate. So pro-lifers hold wide majorities in both chambers. But there is an effort to repeal the pro-life gains that we have made. And of course, let me just step back briefly and just say, after the Supreme Court ruled, and it was one of the highlights of 2022, and I think 2022 is going to be remembered, hopefully, as prominently as 1973, which after half a century overturned the terrible Roe versus Wade decision. Texas had a law ready, the Human Life Protection Act, like many of the other states in your audiences have these so-called trigger laws. They went into effect shortly after Roe was overturned and completely protected unborn babies from abortion. Our elections went well overall. The abortion was not a deterrent to reelecting pro-life members. In fact, I think many times it definitely helped, especially in the Rio Grande Valley, which is more conservative, Hispanic, and Catholic. But our legislature is going to begin meeting in a few weeks in January, and there's going to be a big attempt to add exceptions when the baby is conceived in rape or incest. Those are still babies. We have to protect those babies. So we will be working diligently along with the Texas Catholic Conference of Bishops, a fantastic, very effective on the pro-life issue, very effective. So grateful to work with them and to prevent any exceptions in a law that would allow innocent babies their lives to be taken.
Yeah, Dr. Pojman, the one thing that I noticed over the Christmas little break we had here was I was talking to some family and friends, and most of the people that I know are pro-life. They love babies. They are against abortion. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the cases of rape and incest. They're going to attack that and try to get exceptions put everywhere for rape and incest. And it's purely an emotional stunt. But I've whenever talked to people who are pro-life, they still have this emotional response to the cases of rape and incest. And I was having this discussion just the other day, and they were saying at the end, they were like, well, I understand what you're saying. I get it, but I guess for me it's more emotional. I just can't bring myself to say that I could support banning abortion in cases of rape and incest. How do you, especially for younger people my age, how do you get people on board with being pro-life all the way?
It comes down to this, Adrian, and it's what the Catholic Church teaches. The unborn child is a baby, and if a woman is raped, that is a terrible offense. That is a terrible, violent act. If that child is a victim of incest, that's absolutely horrible. And the state of Texas and the pro-life movement has a very strong responsibility to do everything possible to take care of those victims of rape. But we have to remember, there's a second victim of rape, and that's the innocent unborn child whose father is the rapist, but is still a child nonetheless. And the state of Texas And every state and the federal government has a responsibility to that unborn child as well. We have 2 victims, 2 individuals, and the best course is to protect the lives of both the mother and the innocent unborn child. And they're both innocent.
Yeah, amen. Let me ask you about this other headline I saw. A Plan B gets new label by FDA to clarify it doesn't cause abortion. I feel like the real shift, and it's been going on now for years, not just in the wake of overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision, but Planned Parenthood and abortion providers have seen the writing on the wall, and they've really shifted to using abortifacients, drugs that can be shipped to someone's address. We've seen them go into schools and promote this to girls in schools, risk-free, just give us an address, we'll drop it in the mail kind of a thing. And now we're seeing this headline, Plan B gets new label by FDA. This seems to me like more manipulation, but what say you, Dr. Joe Pojman?
Well, Plan B we in the pro-life movement has always made a distinction. Plan B is intended and marketed as a contraceptive, meaning prevent conception, preventing sperm from reaching the egg. Now, if that's how it works, then it is a contraceptive and it is not an abortifacient. It doesn't take the life of an innocent child if conception, fertilization, has not taken place. The big question, and I want to distinguish that from the abortion pills, drug-inducing abortions that are intended for that. We all know of RU46, methotrexate, some other abortion-inducing drugs. And Texas has made it a felony offense to traffic those drugs and bring them in from out of state or within state. And we're hoping that's a deterrent so that women are not trying to self-abort in their homes. Just a horrendous thought. But our Plan B is supposed to be and was always supposed to be truly a contraceptive, preventing by several methods, preventing sperm from reaching the egg. And now the FDA, if the FDA has claimed that really is the only way it works, I will point out that Plan B has always been statistically a pretty poor method of birth control. It does not work terribly well, and that may be why Planned Parenthood pushes it so much. They push it so much because their clients are taking it, thinking they're protected, and end up getting pregnant, and then Planned Parenthood was right there to provide the abortion. So I'm not sure if it's conspiracy. I think it's maybe just acknowledging that it really is a very poor method of birth control, but it only works by preventing conception, ovulation, preventing ovulation, no fertilization takes place, no innocent human being created, and that may be the true method by which it works.
This article, which I found over at abcnews.go.com, says, quote, Plan B, one step will not work if a person is already pregnant, meaning it will not affect an existing pregnancy. The FDA now states in an update online. Plan B, one step prevents pregnancy by acting on ovulation, which occurs well before implementation. Evidence does not support that the drug affects implementation or maintenance of a pregnancy after implementation, that it does not terminate a pregnancy, close quote. But I think that's the rub right there. There are a lot of people who speak otherwise and say, well, if it can't prevent the ovulation, it is making it hostile environment for the egg to truly be implanted in the womb, and therefore it is an abortifacient. To me, there is a lot of debate over this. I'm certainly no scientist. However, as a Catholic, we would be against any form of contraception, right. Number one. Number two, I think that this is somewhat of a manipulation of words in order to get those fence sitters to buy into this.
Well, the article claims there's more data available to determine that implantation of that newly created human embryo. They use the term fertilized egg. Let's be honest. This is a human being. It's a human embryo. Yeah. And they claim there's new data to show that it does not prevent implantation if fertilization has occurred. They're not making the data available. So I'd like to see those data to really see if their statement is correct.
All right, Dr. Joe Pojman, we are very grateful for your time. Merry Christmas to you. You can visit his website, TexasAllianceForLife.org. for all of the incredible work they are doing. But that's going to do it for hour number one. Coming up at the top of the next hour, I'll share with you the top 10 wasteful spendings of big government by Rand Paul and so much more. GRNonline.com.